Good morning, everyone. I'm Emily Akhtarzandi, Managing Director of Atlantic Live, the events division of The Atlantic, and it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this timely Atlantic Summit, Cracking the Code, the next generation of women in STEM. As we've all seen in the news lately, women in science and tech is a hot topic. Too often, the reasons for this aren't all that uplifting. As a society, we realize that although we've come a long way from the days of male-only universities and engineering teams, the playing field is not yet level. While we're here today to take stock not only of where we are today, where we're coming from, but first and foremost, where to go from here. And so today we'll take a closer look at the experiences and influences that so strongly shape who a girl will become. What is the role of parents, educators, and organizational stakeholders in opening the door to a lifetime of STEM learning? What are the levers in high school and higher education that may just change the course of a career before it begins? And who is the next generation of women in STEM? And how can society create opportunities for all who aim to join it? So we're here to find out. Before we begin, I would like to extend a warm thank you to our underwriter, Dell, for making this all possible. We're looking forward to a rich conversation today featuring some of the country's thought leaders. With one change in our lineup, regretfully, one voice is missing. We're sorry to say Girl Scout CEO Sylvia Acevedo is no longer able to join us, but in her place, we're happy to feature Girl Scout Senior Director of National STEM Strategy, Suzanne Harper, on an upcoming panel. So we're delighted she's here with us. One last quick note, I ask if everyone could please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. You can join this conversation online using hashtag AtlanticNextGen, and find us on Twitter at Atlantic Live. We'll have time for live Q&A with you towards the end of each session, so we want this to be interactive. And now let's kick this off with our first panel, the role of role models, a glimpse into the crucial relationship that parents and caregivers play in a girl's engagement with STEM. So please welcome to the stage Eric Klopfer, Director of the Scheller Teacher Education Program and the Education Arcade at MIT, along with his 11-year-old daughter, Maya Klopfer, a student at McCall Middle School in nearby Winchester. And here to lead the conversation is Atlantic contributing editor Allison Stewart. So Allison, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everybody. All right, I was going to give your dad the first question, but then I saw that rockin' t-shirt. And can you tell me what it says and what it means to you?
The physics is theoretical, but the fun is real.
What do you love about that shirt, and what does that shirt say about you, Maya?
That science is only the best thing ever.
You obviously learned that from your dad and from your folks. Eric, I'm going to go into some of the work you do, but I think it's interesting, the work you do as a parent, to have a daughter who says that and wears that t-shirt. When did it first become apparent to you that your daughter, aside from her genetic makeup, was really someone who had a love of science and a talent for it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's something that we see in our kids and sort of foster in our kids early on in terms of their inquisitive nature about the world around them. She was actually a late speaker. She makes up for it now. She talks a lot, but but she didn't speak until later. I think she was like 3 at the time. But still, even sort of pre-verbal, we see that in the way that they sort of interrogate the world, the way that they play with blocks, the way that they play with toys, the way that they play in the dirt, as she often did. And the way we try to foster that through giving them experiences with the kinds of toys they play with, the kinds of conversations we have with each other as adults around them, and the kinds of ways we try to interact with them as kids.
Let's talk a little bit about the work you do as well. I'm going to let you explain it.
Sure. So I'm a professor at MIT. I run the Teacher Education Program, which is our program that prepares MIT undergrads who want to be math and science teachers. And I also run a group called the Education Arcade, where we primarily focus on The uses of educational technology, mostly in math and science learning at the high school and middle school level. Educational games is our particular focus there. So we do research and development of educational games. We do professional development. We work with networks of schools, and really think about the whole system from the product to the teachers to the community as well. I also co-lead the new Jameel World Education Lab, the PK-12 initiative at MIT with my colleague Angie Belcher.
Maya, what kind of math games do you like and why?
Let's see, I don't know.
Or games that you've worked on with your dad?
Games I've worked on. We've worked on an earner game, which is a penguin that we made up. And it's like you have to do some equation to help him build his igloo. And he made that, and me and my brother played it.
So Erner was a penguin that my son named. I don't remember why he was called Erner. And it's been a way for me to I'm a professor. My lab makes games, but I don't actually get to make many myself. It's mostly people who work with me who do that. And the idea of making games for my kids has been always an appealing thing. It's a chance for me to actually try to learn some new things myself, to get a chance to apply those skills. And it's a way to co-design with them. So in those cases, it was a matter of them having characters that they really liked, that they had made up, and me picking things that they liked. These are not games that I think any more than 2 kids have ever played. But they're games that really were meaningful to them. They often would have their voice in them or my voice in them as well, things like that.
That's important in terms of developing games and math games and science games, is to make sure that the kids can actually see themselves and it has meaning in their lives. Tell us a little bit more how you help your students understand that.
Yeah, I mean, so it is. It's a process of participatory design. So we can come up with ideas ourselves in our lab based on what we think students are struggling with, kids are struggling with, teachers are struggling with. But it's a matter of really engaging with those audiences to really find out what's really interesting and challenging both to them. So that's a really important part of the process, is not to just come up with the idea in your head yourself, which you think might be really great, but really to engage with the audiences who you're really trying to think about. Oftentimes we'll have something, we'll say, this is a really, we want to make this game about this ecological concept, and teachers might say, yeah, it's really great, but we spend about 10 minutes on that in class. It's not an actual problem that our students have. Or, we hear that kids today really love, unicorns. And we'll actually go out and we'll do market research with the students, and they'll say yeah, that's not really our thing anymore. So it really is about really making sure you engage with your audience.
I'm curious, as an educator and as a parent, and I'm a parent of a 9-year-old kid, you're always weighing that balance between screen time and in real life time. And obviously a lot of the STEM and tech involves screens. What's your position as a parent on that, and what's your position as an educator on that?
So I'd be lying if I said I solved that problem with my own kids. So I won't say that. I will say that I've always advocated for not lumping all screen time together. I think there's really different kinds of activities that kids do on screens and really different ways in which they engage them. And it's possible to do too much of any of them. But that includes, it includes playing games. But even playing games, there's different kinds of games that I see. Some of them are much more creative and immersive. I know, Minecraft has been something that a lot of kids have played and enjoyed, for example. We've played World of Warcraft together. I think these are games that are rich context. They're problem solving in them. There's building in them. Those games those are great. Other games, I've seen my son play, and I'm like, those are not really very productive games. You might want to limit your time on those. And then he sees me not limiting my time on those, and so I try to model it a little bit better.
Okay, Maya, you just laughed. Why did you laugh?
Because do you think Clash Royale is a good example?
Sure, yeah.
So there's a game we called Clash Royale that we play, which is kind of like a card-based game. But you basically try to beat the other opponent within 3 minutes. But whenever they lose a battle, they always shake the house out of anger. And whenever we feel the house shake, we always think, oh, he lost a battle.
It's a really interesting game. There's lots of strategy involved, but it's infuriating as well. I've tried to model my own. Okay, I have to limit myself in terms of how much I play that game. But watching videos. Look, they watch videos about what's the science. Some of the science videos you watch.
So one was about the tardigrade, which is a microorganism animal, and it's my favorite animal.
So watching science videos is one thing. She loves comics as well. So watching Spider-Man videos.
That's another.
I would like to limit the amount of time on that. So I've always tried to think about ways that we don't just think about limiting total time, but thinking about the ways that they spend the time on screens and thinking about ways we divide that up.
When school just started in New York, my son goes to New York Public School, and we had a flyer that came home and talked about the STEAM program after school, and I actually thought it was a typo at first. Because we had a STEM program last year, not a STEAM program. So let's talk a little bit about this idea that's emerging of integrating art, the A for STEAM, into STEM. Why do you think that's important and useful?
I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I think as we think about the STEM practices, they're not really anything unless we can think about the way that they sort of deal with aesthetics, they deal with understanding people and the relationship between people and products. I mean, it's a much more interdisciplinary sort of field than we describe it as just STEM. And so I think integrating things like aesthetics, application, the humanities even, I actually think about a much broader, even than just art, but really something that's much even broader than that. And it's really just important to be able to include all those different things, to think about the field as a way we really relate technology to people in really important ways, and consider about the impacts on the people, the way that people use them, and the way that people enjoy them, the way that people think about themselves expressing things creatively through them. It's so important to think about that in a much more interdisciplinary way than we do. It is also, I think, that adding the A into it, certainly in this context, has certainly broadened the appeal. I think STEM has, unfortunately, sort of been branded sort of as a male domain. And I think adding the A into it sort of makes it, just even the word itself, STEAM. It's people have often criticized the word STEM as an acronym, but it's a more playful word, I think. Adding the arts into it makes it feel more playful, makes it feel more creative and expressive, and I think that opens up the domain to in terms of appeal, to a much broader range of people as well.
Now, Maya, did you go to STEAM camp?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us what happens at STEAM camp.
So we did wood shop, and there was stop motion, and there was an astronomy and rocks, and they do a lot of stuff like that, and it's really fun.
For so long, Eric, historically, everybody was in their silo. You had the art people and the science people. What's it going to take to make it be an integrative experience? I mean, and also, how do we get our educators to get to that place?
That's an excellent point, because even now, sometimes when we see things that are labeled STEAM, it's like we're going to make a robot and then we're going to decorate the robot. And it's not really sort of thinking about those in a more integrated way than that. And that goes for a lot of interdisciplinary kind of work that we think about. Even the way you think about science and engineering mixing, or technology and science mixing. A lot of times it's like we're going to do one and then we're going to do the other one, and we'll sort of make sure we sort of check each box there. I do think it's going to be about designers thinking about the ways that we sort of create experiences that really integrate these different areas. And that isn't to say that everybody should sort of invest in each one of them equally. I think one of the things about interdisciplinary work is that it allows people to sort of both play to their strengths and do the things they're interested in, but it also forces them into some other areas as well that they may find interesting as well. So I think it's going to require designers to work on more sort of integrated kinds of topics that really sort of deeply integrate these things. And like a lot of the challenges that we face in education, it's going to require mentor training. And that's not something that we can just sort of pull off in 5 minutes, read a pamphlet and you'll know how to do this thing. It's something that requires a serious investment in educator development. And that means, we're thinking about this at MIT in our own programs, it means not just sort of teaching them how to use the materials, but also teaching them about the underlying topics and what's great about those things. So it's one thing to know how to teach a kid how to do some programming. It's another thing to understand why that's really empowering and interesting and great yourself. And so in our professional development, the first thing we always do is we have educators do the thing that we want the kids to do. So it's not about teaching them how to teach the kids, it's teaching them how to do the things themselves. And it's helping them understand why that's interesting, why that's great, why it's empowering, why it's creative. And then you can have a chance to teach that to whoever you're working with, whether that be a formal or informal education audience.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll have the mics come out so you folks can ask some questions. Not everybody's got a dad who works at MIT, right? You're like the greatest role model for your daughter. So I'm just a very practical question. What can parents do who aren't professors at MIT, especially keep their girls interested, let's be honest?
Yeah, I mean, so I do think there's a matter of sort of trying to be a role model. So it's there's things to do and not to do. Often people have been criticized for they go like, oh, I'm not really very good at math, and we sort of think about other domains. And if people laugh that off oftentimes. Well, I'm not very good at math. If you said I'm not very good at reading, that's not really very laughable. And so we shouldn't sort of say those things. Yeah. You can say I've struggled with math and I've had to work on it. That's okay. You don't have to be an expert. But it's important to sort of not convey sort of these negative connotations for what you think about in those domains. And then I think it is a matter of taking advantage of opportunities that do exist to learn together. You don't have to be the expert on something. It's something we tell to teachers, to parents, all together, that you don't have to be the expert to be able to work with somebody on a project or in a domain. You can learn along with them. And a lot of tardigrades, she mentioned. I didn't know anything about tardigrades. I've learned some things about tardigrades, her favorite animal. But we've learned about it together. And so that's a perfectly great thing to do, is to learn about those things together. I think it's something that a lot of STEM or STEAM toy domains and games have ignored for a while, is sort of designing experiences that both kids and parents can do together. And I think that's really an opportunity that a lot of companies can now entertain as ways. How do you get them to participate in these things together? Maybe not potentially in equal ways. A parent might not say I want to invest 5 hours in doing this, but I want to invest half an hour in doing this, so that when my student or my kid invests 5 hours in it, I have something to talk to them about. And so I think it's an opportunity that a lot of companies have now to sort of create those kinds of experiences. But we can do it together by really just sort of sitting alongside and learning together sometimes.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to get questions from the audience. There's a lot of studies done, I'm sure you talked about this with your dad, that talk about how girls become disinterested in science, right about your age, maybe a little bit younger. They sort of get dissuaded from it. Can you tell us why you think that is?
Maybe it's because they don't see that their friends are doing it, so they kind of don't have anyone to really talk about it and say, hey, did you see the new thing? They just discovered this new planet, and no one was going to really understand, so there's no use of really doing it.
So that idea that your friends might not be interested in it, or you just don't have an outlet for it. So I guess that's why science clubs are really good, and after-school programs and stuff like that, or dads like that. Do we have any questions from the audience? There's a woman right up front.
Good morning. My name is Rachel DeBella. I'm a director in the Women's Center at Boston College. So I just want to thank all of you for what you've shared this morning, and particularly Maya, hearing from you has been really, I think, encouraging for me. I have a teenage stepdaughter at home, so it's been great to hear from you. I think one question that I have is around, particularly in your role at MIT. I work with young women every day who will say that it's hard to even sort of find their voices when they're actually in the classroom or in the lab, and may start out interested in the sciences and then may find that they're changing their majors, or they're just sort of hanging back in class, and we're also watching their academic self-perceptions decline during their time in college. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit with us about what you observe at an institution like MIT among female-identified students, and perhaps what you do as a professor or as a mentor to help support women as they're continuing in their path in their field.
Yeah, it's an important point, and it's a dilemma that oftentimes we face in terms of having same-sex groups and mixed gender groups as well, in terms of having sometimes having girls not feeling comfortable or having their voices squashed by some of the boys in the audience. In terms of MIT, there's sort of an interesting mix. Right now, I'd say overall at MIT, we're close to 50-50 in terms of men and women at the institute. But it does not divide that way up in certain majors. So in computer science, it's still very lopsided, with I think 2/3 or 3/4 male. Whereas in the life sciences, it's very much the opposite. We have about 3/4 or something like that women in a lot of the life sciences majors. And the same sort of goes in the high schools now. We're starting to see that, particularly in the earlier grades, in the earlier high school grades even, in 9th grade, 10th grade, typically when biology comes, the women are sort of self-identifying as enjoying that. So I think one of the things we try to do is think about where are we having success and how do we build on those successes that we have. So if life sciences, which is a huge industry right now, and it's clearly going to be influencing our lives for the future, how do we build on those sort of areas and be able to interest women in those ventures and give them the voices that they need? So a lot of the work that we do in our lab involves life sciences, partially because that's my background and partially because it's an area that we've had a lot of interest from diverse audiences. And it goes for gender breakdown. It also goes down for communities of color, where sort of health issues are a really important issue, and we can sort of identify those as ways of working with those groups. I think it's also about the way you structure classes as well. It's one thing to sort of say, like, we're going to have a whole class discussion, and please raise your hand if you have something to say. It's another thing to think about the way you break down the class and have smaller group discussions and have those percolate up. So that's really important. And it's also really important to have role models. In my classes, I co-teach with women in my classes, and in the work that we do in our lab. Most of the projects are led by women in the lab, as it turns out. So it's important to have role models in those places. I was thinking this morning, in fact, about we have a lot of student programmers in a lot of our projects because we develop a lot of technology. And as I said, it is lopsided at MIT in the computer programming majors that we mostly have men. But if I look across my projects, we mostly have females who are doing students who are doing the programming. I think it's partially because of the domain. They have an interest in some of the domain, and that's influenced some of the way that we think about our own teaching at MIT. Maybe the ways we've taught classes in the past have dissuaded women, and other universities have done that research, shown that changing the topics of some of the programming classes in the early stages attracts more women to those majors. But I think it's also the fact that we have a lot of women involved in those projects, and that's a really important thing to do. That it's not just about who you attract the students, it's a matter of who you have working on projects as well.
Great, thank you.
It's also about being role models for young men, seeing women in science,
It is,
right?
it is
It's
as
not
well, and yes, that was an omission. That's an important point.
We've got someone here.
Good morning. I also want to thank you for coming. I'm Andy Karabutis. I'm Chief Information and Digital Officer at National Grid. We talk a lot about inspiring and attracting and exposing, et cetera. Just a little kind of contrarian view to add to it. Do we also need to just harden our curriculum and put more mandatory classes into elementary schools? Because we lose our girls around 4th grade in interest. And, take a page out of make some more classes mandatory, drive some more exposure that way, and then people that didn't even know they were interested, we're not trying to do a soft and sort of approach it both ways. Thank you.
So I think the sentiment is right that you have there, that it is about sort of making sure that all people sort of have these experiences in early grades. I don't know if it's about sort of creating mandatory experiences. I do think what we need to do is make sure that elementary school teachers feel like they're more prepared and more empowered in a lot of the STEAM domains. And those may be related. In American education, we often have the things that are mandatory are the things that get attention. So it may be that those things are related, but I think that the key here is making sure that the teachers feel ready and empowered to do those things. As Maya's talked about some of her, not all, but some of her elementary school science experiences, they've been very sort of rote experiences where you're sort of, even when you're doing a lab, you're sort of following along in a very cookbook way, which is not very empowering and not very exciting, even when it's covered. I do think it's important to make sure that the teachers, just like I was talking about parents, the teachers feel like they know science, they are prepared for science, they love engineering, they love the integrated disciplines that they can take on. I think that's the key to being able to do this, and that means really taking that professional development really seriously, and not just teaching them how to use the kit, but teaching them about the science underlying it.
We've run out of time. We could talk for another 20 minutes. I encourage you to research some of Eric's work. You have some great videos on YouTube as well if you're more interested in the work that he does. Maya and Eric, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Allison, Eric, and Maya. And next up, a session produced by our underwriter, Dell, to lead It's Time to Stem the Tide. Please welcome to the stage Karen Quintos, Chief Customer Officer of Dell.
Good morning. At Dell, we absolutely believe that the future belongs to those who can build digital technologies and those that can use technology to solve the world's biggest challenges. Job growth in the technology industry continues to outpace that of other industries and is projected to do so over the next 10 years. By 2020, employment in computer-related occupations in the United States is expected to increase by nearly 25%. That makes a ton of sense because at the core of every company is a technology company today. Technology is the critical enabler. We see it at Dell, our customers see it, a number of which are here in the audience with us today. National Grid, General Electric, Uber, Fidelity, as well as a number of great Boston universities and hospitals. This will only become even more obvious in the future because any company starting out today will need to redefine their business, redefine the industry in order to compete and in order to succeed. And technology will be the enabler of this transformation. There is so much opportunity for so many of us to change the game when it comes to how the public sector and the private sector embrace this new normal. 93 out of 100 STEM occupations have wages that are above the US national average. Programming jobs are growing at 12% faster than the market average and paying $20,000 more than jobs that do not require any coding skills. We have to have a strong pipeline of talent, but unfortunately there are many groups, including women, that are being left behind. Women make up only 32% of the world's STEM graduates and hold just 24% of the information and technology jobs. Less than 25% of the students who took the Advanced Computer Science Placement A exam last year were women. And all of that being said, there are still some positive signs that we are seeing. Just this week, the Wall Street Journal reported that women as a share of STEM degree recipients increased in 9 out of 10 of the largest programs over the last 4 years. This is in part due to the aggressive marketing campaigns that some of these colleges have launched. And it's great to see this big push around changing the paradigm and the thinking about the role of technology in fields like science and engineering. And it's paying off right here in Massachusetts. Worcester Polytech Institute, an alma mater of our very own Beth Phelan, who is president of the Dell Data Protection business, is a graduate there. And WPI is doing some amazing work in a number of strategies to enroll and retain women. And this fall, 43% of the first-year students are women, a 10 percentage point jump from last year, and nearly a 20-point jump in the last decade. But outside of this shining example, it's not such a great story when you put a lens on engineering and technology roles. Because despite making up for more than half of the college graduates, women are receiving only 2 out of 10 of the degrees in fields such as computer science and engineering. That simply is not good enough, because if left unchecked, and if we keep fishing in the same places for where the world's future talent is going to come, we are not going to be able to keep up with the demand of what the world is going to need. And we simply cannot afford to lose the perspective of women if they aren't at the table when products and services and innovation are happening. They're going to lose a huge opportunity to bring the wealth of all of their knowledge and their insights to bear, and how that is reflected across our customer base. To change the research and to change the trajectory and the landscape, we need an all-hands-on-board effort, government, policymakers, other public sector leaders, and more importantly, the private sector. So that's why we are here today. We want to share best practices, we want to collaborate, we want to align on the critical actions to increase the number of women in STEM and to keep them in STEM. Last year I had the opportunity, and I was super intrigued by this research that was done by industry analyst Michelle Bailey around what gets girls excited about STEM, what are those triggers, When they stay, why do they stay? And when they leave, why do they leave? This research she has conducted over the last couple of years in partnership with the Women in Technology International, or WITI, has turned out, in my humble opinion, some of the most interesting, actionable insights in this particular area. So I'd like to invite Michelle Bailey, Vice President, General Manager, and Research Fellow at IDC, to join me on stage and have a conversation in this area.
Good morning. Good morning.
Michelle and I go way back.
We do.
So, you know, you and I have poured through the research and everything. Give the audience here a sense for what are some of the insights, right? What triggers girls to get into STEM? What keeps them in the STEM field? And then probably more importantly, when they leave, why do they leave?
Yeah, so the research that we've conducted over the last couple of years with Women in Technology International, we started talking to women in STEM, and then last year they conducted some research that compared results of women to men in STEM work fields. And it was very, very interesting to compare that data. What we found is that women and men have the same ambitions in their career. How about that? So I think sometimes,
Not a surprise.
right? There's this bias in the marketplace that women aren't as serious about their jobs, that they're not as committed to their jobs, when in fact, the data that we see, women actually are more serious about a lot of success attributes in their career. Both men and women are interested in science and technology careers because it drives knowledge with them, it brings them feelings of personal success. They feel like there's an employability aspect to it, right? That there's continuity in their career. And in the middle of that is compensation. So while we sometimes think that everybody's in it for the money or everyone's in it because they're looking for success, compensation actually sits somewhere in the middle. Women are a lot more interested in respect and consider this notion of respect as a success attribute in their career, while men and women both agree that flexibility and work-life balance is very important. So I think there's some of these biases that when we consider what women want in their career from STEM, that it's this idea of well, I can have time off and I have flex time. Men want that too today. So if both men and women want the same things from their career, it's more important than ever that we level the playing field,
right,
and that we make it an equal opportunity for everybody.
So what do you see, Michelle, as in the early days? I mean, we just heard from Maya and her dad. What do you see in those early days really kind of entice a girl to get super interested in this?
Yep. Well, I think Eric is the prototype, right? So we know that early on, having a parent in STEM most affects a girl's choice in their career in science and technology. We also know that if there's an early mentor in the elementary school system, that has a very positive effect as well on women as they enter the workforce. But we still know that 1 in 7 women, when they graduate with a degree in science and technology, actually enter a field in STEM. So it tells us that even with all of these great things that we have going on, that there's something still not working, right? So we have 2 problems. We've got a pipeline problem. We don't have enough women going into STEM. And then we also have an issue that when they do get into STEM fields and work in STEM careers, that the culture in these companies, women are feeling that they don't have the opportunities that are available to them for things that they want to be successful. Knowledge, opportunity, this sense of purpose. So there's still a lot of work to be done. I think it's important, though, for companies, particularly in the private sector, to focus on what are the success attributes, right? I think we talk a lot about why do women leave? What is it that makes them leave? I think we need to start focusing on what's going to make them stay and what are they looking for in their careers.
Yeah, and you know, this has been a big focus area for Dell, this whole area around culture and training and unconscious social bias. And
what are you going to do about bias?
Yeah, well, we've trained 80% of our executives, and we'll hit 100% here over the next couple of months. I think a real light bulb moment goes off when you can get a group of leaders around the table and start to share some of the perspectives and things like that. What I find fascinating about it is so many of the leaders immediately then go to their daughters. I mean, we saw it on stage, right? I mean, I want my daughter to have more opportunities. I've got to change the game. I've got to, be part of all of this. So we're seeing so many more men being part of this conversation. because they want to make, their work environment at Dell better, but they also want to do it for the next generation, and a lot of them have daughters.
Men have to come to the table on this. We know that half of the time when a woman has a professional mentor, that mentor is a man. So we can't do it without men. So I think that that is a very important program that you have. And I think that this notion of that we all have to accept that we all have these subconscious biases, right? We all have them in ourselves. Sometimes I find myself pulling them in check. I think that we have to really talk about it a lot more. And I think the more we talk about it, the less uncomfortable it becomes, right? And the more it becomes part of an accepted practice. And I think, the culture that you're talking about creating at Dell, I think is an incredibly important, especially in technology sectors, right? We've all heard the horror stories, particularly in tech, in VC industries, right? We especially have to continue the conversations there and I think really up-level the need to make sure that those practices don't continue.
And the other thing I found interesting about your research is when women leave the STEM field, why do they leave and where do they go?
Yeah, they're looking for more opportunity. They don't go home, right? They don't go stay home. They go out and they find another job somewhere else. Or they look at starting their own business. 30% of women today in STEM are looking at either starting their own business or actually have started their own business. They don't always go into STEM. 2/3 of the time they go into STEM, the other third of the time they don't go into STEM.
Interesting. We saw it this year at our Dell Women's Entrepreneur Network event, the number of fast-growing female entrepreneurs that were in the fields of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, cloud, semiconductor. I mean, it was staggering versus what we saw just 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So it certainly validates what what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, the issue for women looking to start their own business in STEM is, again, they have the same issues that men do. How do I get funding? It's very risky for me. What we do see, though, is that women who look to start their own business, one of the hurdles that they face that we don't see as much with men up front is that they're constantly considering what the impact of their family is going to be and what it's going to do to their work-life balance. They think a lot about that up front. What we also see is that men, when they start their own business, later on they figure out, oh my gosh, this is really impacting my work-life balance. But I think the important
You'll get there just at a different time.
Exactly. But I think the important part is you probably lose a lot of women up front because they don't feel like they have the support or they don't have the time. It feels too risky for them, yet men just kind of jump in there, they take that leap, and they figure it out later on, right? So that's still the difference that we're seeing in the marketplace today.
Well, that's a big reason why we're here, right? So let's talk. This is a multifaceted opportunity, right? It's going to take kind of the public sector and the private sector to really come together. One of the things that I loved having Maya and her dad up here is this whole theme around role models.
Yeah, right.
And the critical role. I mean, I see it with my daughters.
Yep, absolutely.
I see it with other girls, and you can't
in my
overemphasize.
family, absolutely.
They want to see it. We need to have more of those. We just launched a program at Dell where we're trying to challenge 140,000 of our team members around the world to mentor a girl in STEM and use that as a way to just continue to build the pipeline. Our team members love to be part of this. We have a video that we'd like to show all of you around it. We're going to be talking more about it in the International Day of the Girl that will be coming up, International Women's Day. And we think it's a great opportunity for all of us, just kind of one girl, one student, at a time to just kind of give back to the community. So take a look at the video.
I'm Quinn Lankford. I'm 15. I'm going into 10th grade at Cedar Ridge High School. I think it's important for people, especially in this generation, to get involved in STEM. My parents studied engineering in college, and I just saw what my parents were doing, and it really inspired me.
I'm proud to hear my daughter, who's 15, talk about STEM and how important it is to her, and also to talk about her parents as role models. I think for any parent, you want your child to exceed the success that you've had.
Susie Rich was actually a founder of our robotics team. She founded this robotics team so that her daughter and other girls could have the same opportunities as boys did. Because of the work that Susie has done, Over 40 girls are now on our team. Some of them never even touched a drill or a wrench or anything before joining the team, and now they've gained tons of knowledge. And she's a perfect example of how one person can impact so many kids' lives.
My job as mentor is to keep the door open. You have to let the girls try. You have to let them fail. Failure is great. And you have to let them fail in a safe place. Quinn started 4 years ago, and Quinn was quiet. Her eyeballs were always bright and sparkling. And then we heard this voice start speaking, and it was like, whoa, wait, that was Quinn. Whoa, this girl's coming. And she's going to go and be and do something because it has started.
The most recent STEM project that I worked on and was really excited about was the robot that my robotics team recently built. Every year we have a new challenge and we have to build a new robot. I'm really proud of it because every piece was built by a girl on our team.
In STEM-related fields, only 25% of the jobs are currently held by women. It really points out the need for role models. It points out the need for mentoring.
It's why we're launching this Power of One Mentor Challenge. 1 hour, one child, one conversation at a time about these careers in STEM and technology.
I'd like schools to have more of a variety of STEM classes and really encourage girls and minorities to take those classes. Girls are over 50% of the population, and we're losing most of the perspective in our society if we exclude them. We really need everyone we can get and every solution we can get to face the problems we have.
Thank you, Karen and Michelle. And now please join me in welcoming our next panel, The Formative Years. It is my pleasure to introduce Christine Cunningham, Director of the Museum of Sciences Engineering is Elementary, Aya Badir, founder of Little Bits, Suzanne Harper, Senior Director of National STEM Strategy at Girl Scouts of the USA, and renowned children's author Andrea Bidet. I'd also like to welcome back Allison Stewart to lead this conversation. So Allison, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. The floor is actually going to be theirs. I'm going to leave a lot of time for Q&A because this is such a superstar panel. So everybody get your questions ready. I do want to sort of set a baseline, and I'm going to ask each of you to tell us a little bit about your history and then how it brought you to the place where you decided, this is how I'm going to make a contribution to STEM and how I'm going to engage STEM in my career and in my passion. Let's start with you.
I actually have a background in science and in biology and computer science, and I was the IT person at the other end of the phone for years. You know, the did you turn it off and turn it back on person. And then when I had kids, I stopped working and I started reading tons of children's books and ended up writing some, and they sort of took off. And it just happens that some of them happen to be about a girl who's an engineer and a girl who's a scientist and a boy who's an architect. So even though my background was in STEM, the approach I take is really about storytelling and trying to connect to kids at a really personal level. So I don't even think really of these books as being about engineering or science, but about being about perseverance and curiosity, because every kid has those traits. And I think if we can approach helping girls particularly, but all kids, look at it sort of as a human endeavor. And like they'll think, well, I'm curious, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can try this experiment. Maybe I can go out and try making things. So really taking it from a personal storytelling approach, which we know girls particularly respond to storytelling. So, I mean, boys do too, but that's a really interesting doorway to take into these worlds, the STEM world.
Suzanne.
Sure. Most of my background has been in publishing, both magazine publishing and writing books for children and young adults as well. I was at Disney Adventures magazine for many years, which is a magazine for tweens. That background in writing for children and teenagers actually led me to Girl Scouts in the program team and working there. And I have always been interested in STEM. I developed a great appreciation and love for STEM activities and STEM education at Girl Scouts. 2 years ago, we decided to create, as an organization, a national STEM initiative, and I was asked if I was interested, and of course I said yes. And I love the job because not only are we creating a program for girls that will interest them in STEM, but every day I get to watch the future being invented. That's the way I feel as I read all the articles on STEM every single day.
Aya?
I think I was always interested in STEM. I can't remember a time where I wasn't. I was always a tinkerer kid. I was breaking things apart, and I was sometimes trying to put things back together. But I attribute it to really kind of the environment I grew up in. My parents would get us electricity sets and chemistry kits since we were very young, and would encourage us to break things open. We wouldn't get in trouble when we did. I have 3 sisters, and all of us are in the STEM field one way or another, and we grew up in Beirut, in Lebanon. So it really inspired me kind of on my trajectory. I did engineering. I did computer engineering, then I went to MIT to do a master's at the Media Lab, and kind of reconnected with my roots of how I grew up with chemistry sets and electricity kits, and ended up starting a company making electronic kits to inspire kids, girls in particular, to become inventors, engineers, and get excited about STEM.
Christine?
My first love was actually teaching. So I went to kindergarten and came home and taught my 3 younger siblings basically every day since then. So they were all reading before they entered into kindergarten. But I was also raised by, my mother was a science and math person in the days when there weren't a whole lot of science and math majors. And so I grew up, of course, girls do science, so my second love was science. And in middle school, I started to watch my female friends leaving science, and I thought this was just perplexing to me. Why would you leave something, especially if you were good at it? So when I was thinking about what to do, I always knew I was going to teach eventually, in some way, shape, or form, but I got an undergraduate bachelor's and master's degree in science, and watched, again, girls, women leaving for no reasons that had to do anything with their abilities. So I started to think about how do we help people who are underrepresented, underserved, and also underperforming in science and engineering. How do we keep them? There's nothing wrong with them. There's something wrong with the way that we're presenting it and teaching it. And so that launched me into a PhD program in education, science education, with a real focus on sort of how do you use education, and particularly STEM, as a tool for social justice. So I did a lot of reading about the features of STEM and science and engineering that tend to drive girls and women out, and on the other hand, the kinds of things they're attracted to. And when I started to move into engineering from science, I realized there are facets and features of engineering that can re-engage students who have not traditionally been interested in or who have been driven out of science and engineering. And decided that it was time to bring engineering down from just being a collegiate or high school endeavor to younger grades. We have to get them before they've been socialized that they can't do it. So if you have them doing it and you call it engineering, then they start to do it. And so I founded Engineering as Elementary about 14 years ago.
You said that you should introduce engineering before they can spell it.
Before they spell it, yep. They can do engineering before they spell it. I like to say we're natural engineers. If you watch any 3-year-old at play, they build sandcastles, they build forts, they build dolls' beds, they build them, they knock them down. That we naturally solve problems as human beings, and traditionally we've educated that out of kids. And they go to school, they're told there's a right answer and there's a way to do it. And so my real question was, how do you take this natural process that people do and get it into schools and foster creativity and innovation throughout their career so that we equip them with a set of habits of mind that prepare them for whatever future they have. Some of them may go into STEM, some of them may do something different. But can we foster these problem-solving processes and innovative sort of ideas of kids, all kids? And so making sure that anything we create rests on, we have 14 inclusive design principles for all of our curricula. And we make sure that we start thinking about this diverse audience and how do you design for the inclusion of everyone with the hope that You can foster abilities and skills that go sort of lifelong if you get them when they're young. And they do engineering, and we have little 4 and 5-year-olds walking around singing songs about engineering, doing engineering, saying, I'm an engineer. It's harder, not impossible, but harder for someone to come and say, you don't belong in engineering when they've had that really positive experience.
This brings me to you and bringing engineering to play. Show folks what little bits. I'm going to show you. They're so cool.
Sure. So Little Bits is a system of electronic building blocks. We were very inspired by Lego, but rather than the building blocks being plastic and piled on top of each other to make buildings and bridges that are static, we make electronics. So each building block is a circuit. It's pre-assembled, pre-engineered, and they snap with magnets so that you can make a circuit immediately. And it's color-coded, so blue is power, pink is input, green is output, and very quickly you can start to make circuits that are pressure sensitive, that are responding to sensors, that are, you can make sound, and you can make complex mechanics. This is one of our newest bits that we made. That's a partnership with a large franchise that I will not name, but maybe you recognize it.
Do it again, I'm sorry, I sang.
So the idea is
that. I did that again, I sang over here.
Never gets old, yeah. Ever. I just carry it around and just do it for people to start conversation. Yeah. No, the idea is that when Lego started, the world was made of buildings and bridges, and the way you allowed kids to participate in that world and imagine that world and become prepared for the world that they were coming out of school for, is you would give them these static building blocks. The world has changed now. The world is it's interactive, it's algorithmic, everything is responsive to something else. Kids have to be technology savvy. It's a matter of literacy. It's no longer okay to not understand it, and so we equip them with a building block that is capturing technology, lights, sound, sensors, motors, programmable, Wi-Fi, cloud, Bluetooth, all the things that they see around them that they take for granted, that they use and are savvy with. From a consumption perspective, we give them the tools to create with. And so the company has been around for about 6 years. We're at about 20,000 schools. We're in about 60 countries. We mostly focus on ages 8 and up. And so 8 to 12 is really the sweet spot. But in schools, we see it used in science class and math class, but also in arts and crafts, in design thinking, in entrepreneurship, in grammar, and all sorts of things. And we really kind of try to employ, STEAM principles and really try to infiltrate every aspect of education and of play.
I'm interested in the development, when you're in the development process. Did you have discussions, or what were the discussions around whether to make these gender neutral or not? Because there are toys like Goldie Blocks, which is a sort of an engineering set specifically geared towards young girls who didn't have those kind of toys and tools. They were stuck in the pink aisle, didn't have that. What were those conversations? Because to me, it seems like it is a gender neutral toy.
Well, first of all, at the beginning, it was just me, so it was my conversations with myself, which is...
those are sometimes the best.
Which is,
Good things come out of those.
exactly.
As long as you always win those.
Exactly. One of my missions was always to get more girls into STEM, but I disagree with the strategy of making gendered products. I never wanted to be a girly girl, and I never thought of myself as any different than any boys that were around. And so I didn't want to kind of perpetuate this idea of like girls play alone, boys play alone. We had to create something that was really about girls and boys together, about different ages together, about parents and kids together, and tech savvy and non-tech savvy together. So Little Bits from day zero was gender neutral. And the way we make it gender neutral is that, you notice the circuits are white. They're not the traditional black or green, because we wanted to break out of the stigma associated with electronics. The connectors are candy colored. They're neon. So they're pink, but they're also green and blue, and they're really they feel like playful candy. We deliberately in our marketing showcase a lot of girls We showcase inventions that are not just vehicles and shooting games. We show bubble blowers and Ferris wheels and robotic pets and all sorts of things that really span across girls and boys. As a result, 40% of our community in kids is girls. So it works when you really break down the boundary early on, and when you create these gender-neutral experiences, it actually works.
The Girl Scout badges have expanded in a big way.
Yes.
You can get a cybersecurity badge now.
Well, we're working on those. They're coming out next year.
Next year.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the kinds of STEM badges and the encouragement of girls to think about this. Because, I mean, when I was a Girl Scout a million and a half years ago, it was cooking and campfire and sit-upons, and now you've decided to meet them where they live.
Absolutely. It's a way of keeping Girl Scouts relevant, although, of course, camping will always be relevant to girls and to people in general. But we're very excited about what we're doing. We started a new national STEM initiative about 2 years ago, and this fall, we've launched for K through 5 girls a series called Think Like an Engineer, where they learn design thinking, Think Like a Programmer, to learn how programmers think, computational thinking, and Think Like a Citizen Scientist. Girls earn awards that have those titles, and then they can also do robotics badges. They can also do mechanical engineering badges, and as you said, cybersecurity will be coming next year. So, and we're going to be doing the same thing for the older girls as well. And it really is important, to your point, that girls are growing up in a world that is very technological. It is about learning how computers work and all that. And it's also tapping into what girls really want. They love to invent. They love to make things. And they actually are very interested in being entrepreneurs. I've heard that come up a few times already on this panel. So we're hoping to pull all of that together to help girls to achieve the ambitions and the dreams that they have.
What are your challenges in doing that?
Well, one of the challenges is, frankly, kind of our scale, because we have almost 2 million girls. And it's actually a challenge and a nice thing to have, because we know that girls and kids in general develop their STEM identity around 2nd or 3rd grade. They either say, you know what, STEM is fun, I can do it, I might like it, or they decide it's not for me. And if they decide that in 2nd or 3rd grade, it's really hard to get them back in middle school or high school. The great news is that the 2nd and 3rd graders, the Girl Scout Brownies, are our largest demographic. So we're able to reach 800,000 girls just in that age group. So the scale is great. I think it's really about getting the program out to girls and to support our volunteers. We have 800,000 volunteers. We need to support them in terms of delivering it. And we really need to attract more STEM professionals who want to lend a hand, which doesn't mean that you have to be a troop leader that meets every other week in a church basement, right? But to come to a council event, a Girl Scout council event, and work with girls, or to come to one troop meeting. It's so much, it has so much impact for girls when women who are STEM professionals come and talk to them. Some girls we've had programs, we had one program on food science, and a food scientist came and talked about, oh, I invent ice cream flavors. And there was a girl who was so intrigued, she kept stalking her. She was following her to the parking lot saying, tell me more about this, right? So girls don't even know what they don't know, and we can introduce that to them.
Something you said, which is interesting, is that they decide their science, people are not. But we all know sort of the world helps them decide whether they're science people or not, and that goes to, I think, the first page in Rosie Revere, Engineer. It says, this is the story of Rosie Revere, who dreamed of becoming a great engineer. In Lila Greer's classroom at Blue River Creek, young Rosie sat shyly, not daring to speak. And you see her sort of not sure she wants to speak up. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you think we can combat those outside influences that push people to decide one way or the other, especially young girls.
Well, I think that what you said a moment ago is so on target, where girls are now at 2nd, 3rd grade deciding their STEM identity. Recently, about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a study that showed that girls, 6 and 7-year-olds, already start thinking that boys are better at STEM than they are. That suggests to me that we are starting way, way, way too late, and that we have to really start from the get-go, so that this being comfortable with ideas of exploration and curiosity in STEM really just become part of the girls' DNA, so that when they get into school, they're going to really hit the ground running when they get to join, these marvelous programs and then start working with things like Little Bits. Just that's so important. So I've been thinking about why doesn't that already happen? And it seems to me when you talk really young kids, they have access to media, being books and TV, but they always have gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are their parents, their grandparents, daycare people, and eventually maybe preschool teachers. So I think that the level of comfort that those gatekeepers have with STEM will determine early on how much exposure and what kind of exposure these kids will have, be that, doing things like your parents might have done, where you're getting there doing hands-on things at home, or getting into programs, or finding books like mine and so many others. There's lots and lots of great books. But I think the reason that's not happening is something seriously fundamental about the way we think about science. We think about science as finding answers. And science is about asking questions. So imagine a girl coming up to her mom or whoever and says, "Mom, why is the sky blue?" And the mom, if she's very comfortable with science, will sort of take it and run with it. But if she's not, she might be, "I forgot that day in 6th grade. I don't remember the answer." Well, suddenly now it's this sort of frustrating moment for both of them. But what if we change that and we find ways to help people think of science as questioning? And when that girl comes up and says, "Mom, why is the sky blue?" the mom says, "I don't know. Let's figure it out." And then the girl says, "Well, how do we do that?" And the mom says, "I don't know. Let's figure it out." And then that starts suddenly this dialogue, and it starts this process. And imagine the power of that, where now instead of a frustrated parent and a frustrated kid, you have two scientists on a quest to figure things out. How empowering is that? How incredibly wondrous to have a kid on the same footing as their adult in a process of exploration. And so, of course, the next step then is to find who are the allies out there. Who are the people who know these answers or know the questions to take them through the process? And the natural next stop is, of course, the library, where you can do that step of scientific exploration and find out what people have already found out, and also learn how to find things out. I think that the libraries in this country are greatly underused, and librarians are on this. School librarians are on this. I mean, they are up for this challenge, and they are starting maker spaces. They are really in the game of helping kids and hopefully families, and certainly once they get to school, to really be connected and to help figure this out.
Let's get some microphones out and, let's go. They're ready to go. Let's do it right here. I had another question, but.
My name is Jessica Polito. I'm at Wellesley College, where, among other things, I work with our elementary education program in math. And that's my concern, that the overwhelming majority of our elementary teachers are women, and many of them, I would say most, are really not themselves deeply comfortable with math and STEM. And I certainly believe, and there's research that supports it, that they, even with the best of intentions, they pass some of that attitude on to their students, and particularly their girls, who see them as role models because they are women. So I suppose I'm asking, what way do we have to get this huge number of elementary educators involved in not just the conversation that it's important, but the attitude change and the learning for themselves?
That sounds like it might be your wheelhouse.
So this is a challenge that we faced a lot, especially when you throw not only the word math, but engineering, which was completely unheard of at elementary level when we started. We actually had to slide it in the early years as design, because they wouldn't show up if it said engineering. But what we've seen from teachers is once you can get them engaged in it, they think about what they're capable of doing and what their students are capable of doing differently. So we like to say that the students actually drive the teachers to think about the capabilities of both the students as a whole and the student as an individual differently. Because if you're doing it and you're sort of shaking up the norms in ways that are outside of traditional ways of teaching, they're not doing worksheets, they're not looking for the right answer, you're giving an open-ended problem to which a multiplicity of answers arise, you sort of disrupt the norm, and then they have to think about themselves and their students differently. And one of the most gratifying things that we hear from the field, I think, with our project is teachers saying, I never thought that fill in the blank, some child who hasn't done traditionally well in school or from a population that hasn't, could be such a great engineer. Or everyone in the class recognizing students have different kinds of talents, and the students themselves sort of coming to that realization, because that's the learning moment where you're transforming how teachers think about the abilities of their kids and kids think about the abilities of themselves. And I think you have to shake it up a little bit in order for things to settle differently.
Could I add too that adding an element of something they are very comfortable with, which is literacy, and driving the engineering process or the discovery through STEM through books is an incredibly powerful way to do it. There's a marvelous series published by the National Science Teachers Association called Picture Perfect STEM. And the idea is they take picture books and of any variety, and then they pair those with different science projects, engineering projects, and they're fantastic. So it's a way to sort of ease into that, but it also really connects again with girls and all kids, but girls who are particularly interested in narrative. So that's fantastic. Also, I think it's a really, really rich time right now for books. And I think helping educators be aware of what's out there. One resource that I go to all the time is amightygirl.com. Is, I think, for any student, for any kid, one of the best curated sites of what's new in kids' books, but a particular focus towards girls, but fantastic resource for that.
And can I also mention one more thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
Just leading on what you were saying about reaching
on the
people
bus.
where they're comfortable. We have the same issue actually sometimes with Girl Scout volunteers. They don't have teaching degrees either, most of them, or maybe are not comfortable with STEM, but we find that when we do activities that feel familiar, it's very, very helpful. So for example, we were working with code.org on our Think Like a Programmer series. And they chose and suggested one activity that I absolutely loved because it was making a sun catcher, which is a craft. And every girl gets to go home with a sun catcher, and that's just awesome in Girl Scout world. But you're learning algorithms, variables, and functions by doing that. It's also very helpful to have, they also had a video with someone talking about how you teach the algorithms and functions and variables using the sun catcher. So that was really helpful. And then the other thing was sometimes having a professional come in and talk about the reality of what it's like to work in an engineering field, for example, is helpful. When we piloted our engineering series, one of the volunteers said, what was so great was we had a member of the Society of Women Engineers come to one of our meetings, and she told us, when you try something, if you invent something and you prototype something and you try it, you will either succeed or you will learn something. It is not failure. And she said, that's our mantra now. And I love that her girls are taking that forward with everything that they're doing.
Any other question here?
Great. Thank you. My name is Paul Paravano. I'm from MIT, do government relations there. And I wanted to add another observation to this wealth of information that you all are giving us. About 6 years ago, a computer science professor at MIT started a class called Principles and Practice in Assistive Technology. I was, of course, fascinated by this because I benefit so much from assistive technology. And for those 6 years, the class has been oversubscribed, and it is the only class at MIT taught in the School of Engineering that has more women in it than men. And I wonder if that tells us something about what motivates young women to think about continuing their careers in engineering, because at MIT, we're blessed with half the freshman class who are already talented and gifted in science and technology. But this is a way that perhaps these young women are thinking about how they can make a better world, help other people, and think about developing economic models and companies, startup companies, that can assist people in a variety of ways. I wonder if any of the panelists have a comment on that.
We actually had this
That,
conversation.
yes, yeah. You should have been back there. We
Yeah.
had this. So.
So we were talking back before we came out about the, one of the ways that you can grab girls, but also just a more broad population, is to link and show the benefits of engineering as a helping profession. So I like to say 98% of what we interact with in our world has been made by an engineer or touched by an engineer. And so you give me anything and I can tell you what engineer, and sometimes scientist, is behind it. And so if you draw out those explicit helping connections, people, animals, the society, the environment, you tend to draw in and make it really relevant. So context was another thing. I'll let someone fill in that,
Real-world
setting the
challenges,
context.
yes.
We actually had an experience with this a little bit. So we, every few months, we launch a challenge where we invite our community to participate in a challenge, like invent something that moves, or invent something that pranks someone. And one of the challenges we launched was Invent for Good. And we had kids participating. We had by far the most entries in that challenge. And we had kids participate, many of them creating something to help someone in their community or somebody underprivileged in some way. And some of the inventions were, for example, assistive technology for a young girl created something for her grandfather who had a seeing impairment, where there was an ultrasonic sensor, and every time he would come close to an obstacle, it would start buzzing and tell him that he had to move away. We had people create light patterns for wheelchairs so that the wheelchairs could be more visible when they're farther away. We had all sorts of like little delivery mechanisms, all hundreds of entries. And I remember very well after seeing that, I asked our head of community, does this look like there are more girls in this challenge than boys? And we didn't do like a full-on study, but anecdotally, yes, it was overwhelmingly more girls than boys. And so we saw these girls inventing things that would really solve problems around sustainability, around assistive technology, around helping the less fortunate. Incredible ideas, some of which don't exist in the world today. And so we've had a fantasy of like, what if we kind of explode this and make it bigger and try to find some way to fund them to make something bigger. So we haven't yet, but I think there's so much room to be able to create partnerships with companies that are in real kind of engineering and technology in the world, and they're enabling and that have funding, and these ideas that come from kids, because it raises awareness, it empowers them, and also I really think it surfaces new ideas that maybe adults are not thinking about.
Could I
just dive in, go.
Oh, one thing to that. I think that just, we're saying this, how girls and kids respond to real world challenges. And I think that sometimes we find that surprising. But if we do, it's because we forget just how incredibly amazing kids are and how capable they are. It is a real ultimate act of respect to them to invite them to the conversation. And they deserve to be asked, how do you want to help solve climate change? How do you want to help solve the water problem? Because they're the kids, these are the people who are inheriting these problems. And they feel respected, they feel included, and oh my gosh, you're right. Who knows what they will come up with? So, go kids.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi everyone, my name is Susan Garfield. So I'm a mother of a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old girls. I also happen to be a doctorate of public health, have been in the life sciences industry for 23 years. Kind of have always thought of myself as trying to push forward STEAM activities, but now I have this real-life lab with this 13 and 10-year-old girl. And so my question is this. First a plug. We're involved in this incredible program called Destination Imagination. If anybody doesn't know about it, go look it up. It is the most amazing experiential education program for kids, 4th to 12th grades. They do 6-month projects of activating science and art and learning through experience. So look it up, give to it, participate in it. Okay, the question. I notice with my girls that even when they're engaged in math and science activities, my oldest through things like Russian math and science club and robotics, and my youngest through things like cooking, there is not necessarily a gender gap, but almost an ethnic gap emerging in our schools. And so I'm saying this from the position of being a scientist, not I don't want you to take this as a social commentary, but maybe it is. We as parents, especially third, fourth, fifth generation, are parenting our kids differently than first generation parents. There's a huge community of scientists coming into the Boston area with incredible knowledge, and their kids are starting to go down different paths. And I'm wondering how we can embrace this infusion of innovation and thinking, and also different styles of parenting, so that we can engage our kids in math and science in a more meaningful way and bring that teaching into our schools. So I just wanted to ask you the question. I don't think it's just gender. I think it's ethnic norms, cultural norms, as well as gender. So.
And also for different communities who have different levels of exposure, not just people who are coming who have great high exposure, to your point, underserved communities. And I'm going to ask you to answer this fairly quickly because we're a little over time.
I think, having a diversity of ways into a problem and recognizing that different people will bring different attributes and look to what they're bringing to the problem and how you build on their strengths is one thing that across the literature, researchers are suggesting is a way to engage people from, points of strength, and then from there, when there's some trust built, you can move into areas that might be less familiar. Sort of recognizing the diversity is, I think, part of what makes science and engineering innovation flourish.
And I would just say starting really, really, really young with books and media and having a wide variety of representation of all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds in that, just to give kids the thought, oh, maybe that's a possibility, and the parents as well. So.
Let's thank our panels. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you to Allison and our fantastic panelists. And for our last conversation of the day, we'll be rethinking it all in high school and higher education, as well as exploring new methods for jumpstarting the transition of young women to the STEM workforce. It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Katie Burke, Chief People Officer at HubSpot, Alec Resnick, Director of Powerhouse Studios, Joan Reed, Dean of Diversity and Partnership at Harvard Medical School, Catherine Newman, Incoming Vice President of Academic Affairs at the University of Massachusetts, and our own Steve Clemens will be moderating this conversation. So
hey,
Steve.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much. Yes, you can applaud them. They're good. I just wanted to take a moment because I think this is a very, very interesting. I've had the benefit of having a list of all of you, and it's an amazing array of people who've attended today. Some of you have flown in from California, from Denver, from all over. You're at universities, you're at nonprofits, some of you are HR chiefs, some of you are at private firms. And so this is an incredible moment. I hope a couple of years out, people can say, hey, remember that Atlantic Dell Forum where we got together, something happened. Katie Burke has written, and I've read a lot of what you guys have said. You got to diversify your network. So I want to say one thing real quickly, that after this is over, you have a little time. Many parties you go to suck because no one introduces you to one another, right? You go in, you don't know anybody. Pretend this is your party. This is your day. You've spent a couple of hours with us, that you own this. Meet somebody you don't know. That'll make us very happy. We have Intel here, Salesforce, Uber, National Grid, Dell, Biogen, Philips Healthcare. There are a lot of private companies. If you guys can't solve this problem, then I'm not sure who can. So I'm just saying, just take an opportunity to meet somebody you didn't know. Maybe it'll be lousy, but it might actually be someone interesting. So I hope you'll do that. Hey, thanks very much, guys, for spending some time here. I wanted to I was so fascinated by how good everyone else was on the earlier panels. They're good people. They're earnest. They're moving notches up a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the ruthless way to win in terms of getting more people in there and identifying who are the villains in the way, what are the best practices, what science do we need to think about. And Catherine, I want to start with you because you've been talking a bit about the science of how to get this right. So moving beyond creativity and fun, I'd like to know if I really wanted to have a change in 10 years where people no longer need to have women in STEM forums, what would we have to do?
Well, at the University of Massachusetts, where we are quite dedicated to cracking this code, we think that there's a science underneath all of this, and it derives from the study of social psychology, which is the field that studies human motivation, it studies perception, and these turn out to be highly manipulable precepts. So let me just give you some examples and why they work in the classroom, which then pumps up the pipeline for all the corporations that are here in the room. If you start with the belief that talent in science is innate and immutable, then when you hit a setback, you immediately assume this is because I'm not in the category of potentially successful people. But if instead you rely on the work of social psychologists like Carol Dweck at Stanford, who has argued that we need to push the idea that it's mutable, it's changeable, and it's about effort, not about innate ability, you change the vector of a student's experience in class, and you increase their desire to be retained in this field. So if I hit a setback and I think, oh, well, that's just a setback, I have a very different view than I think I hit a setback, it means I am not suited for this because I'm female, because I should be getting out of this field. You have a completely different vector of experience. How do you change that mindset? Well, one thing you can do in the classroom is to reward people for revising their work, right? Instead of just, it's that test at the end of the semester that determines how well you did, you make everyone in the class turn in their work, they get compliments, they get criticisms, they turn it in again and again and again, and what you reward is that persistence and improvement, and the message that sends is anyone can do this.
So do you folks do that?
We are doing this, and we are trying to depend on these observations, again, driven from social psychology, to change the way we deliver the curriculum, which in turn is changing the persistence of women in STEM. Let me give you another example. Everybody has been talking in this session and elsewhere about mentors. What happens if you have a different composition of your mentoring labor force? Well, one of the things we've done is take our introductory engineering courses, and we have randomly assigned students to mentoring groups where there were women mentors and male mentors, and we can see that when you have female mentors, the female, and nothing else is different, just the gender of the mentor, the vector of the students in that mentoring group is entirely different. The persistence of women jumps way up when there are female mentors. What about if you have research or problem groups? Students in engineering and science work in teams all the time. You put one woman in that team, and she tends not to do all that well by herself. You put two women in a team, and all of a sudden you get a completely different vector of persistence for the women in that group. So this is a way of saying there is a science of social psychology. It tells us a lot about perception, about self-understanding, and it's manipulable. Its findings are manipulable in the classroom setting, and that in turn affects persistence. I think later on we will see that the same principles would hold in corporate work groups. Right now we're worried about the pipeline, so we're applying these ideas in the Institute for Diversity Sciences at the University of Massachusetts.
Thank you for sharing that with that, this notion that there's an underlying science. I sort of feel like there's, like I said, then here's an underlying science of good parties and good party hosts and getting networks broadened and, you know, diversifying your networks. And Katie, I was very impressed when you were sort of talking about, you know, calling on people to kind of further diversify their own networks. But just in terms of responding to Catherine, and you're in the real world, you're developing a product, you've got a business that operates in this arena. What do you feel is the deficit that's missing out there for maintaining the track for resilience, I guess, as you just put it, sort of a resilient stance of women staying in this arena?
I think the biggest deficit is actually creativity to address some of the problems that have existed. So corporate diversity and inclusion programs have existed for 30 or 40 years in their current form, and I actually think one of the biggest challenges is thinking that people in the C-suite, like myself, have all the answers. I think that's a huge mistake. And I actually think the most important work that any of us can do is actually ask some of the people on the front lines what they want most and give them the creativity and autonomy to solve it. So I'll give you two examples. Two of the most powerful forces in transforming our women at HubSpot initiatives have come from frontline female engineers. One of whom noticed that in the interview process, go through the technical test, we're having conversations, let's say Alec and I are talking about things, often you end up talking about your side hustle, which is a web app that you've built or something similar. And you can imagine it engenders right away this, like, we have something in common. We have made something we care about. And people's eyes light up when they've made something that they care about. we noticed a pattern that a lot of our female CS graduates were often really focused on the academic part of their work. So they were really proud of their portfolio, their grades, that sort of thing. Often they were athletes or musicians in their spare time, and so they weren't hacking away on Friday nights at different projects. They were probably at some really good parties, I hope. And so one of our female engineers got together with one of our female recruiters, and we designed a weekend build a web app workshop where women who were in CS formally could build their first web app. And that way, when they came into interviews at tech companies, I would love it if they ended up at HubSpot, but anywhere, they would have something to talk about, and their eyes would light up, and they'd have recent applicable experience to share. And so I say that to say that sometimes we in the C-level overcomplicate things. And we think about, what will the media say about this? What will our lawyers say about this? What will all these people say about this? And instead, I actually think sometimes if you hand over the reins to frontline employees to creatively solve it, they'll come up with far better ideas than anyone else. The second idea came from, I think visibility really matters. I think everyone in this room thinks visibility really matters. We talk a lot about the problem of visibility in women in tech, but we don't often empower frontline employees to change it. So we had a female engineer who was super passionate about Wikipedia. She basically said, if I ask young women in coding boot camps globally who they admire as a female engineer or who they admire as an entrepreneur, the same white male names come up. How do we actually change that? And so we empowered her to set up a Add the Women Back event where we literally just said to people, set up a Wikipedia account, learn about a female entrepreneur or engineer, and celebrate her. And as it turns out, Wikipedia now has hundreds more entries from our employees and our leaders, including our male leaders, to build visibility. And then we tweeted at them. We were like, hey, April Underwood from Slack, you're awesome, and we just wrote you a wiki, like you have a wiki article. And she wrote back and was like, wait, what is this? This is awesome. This is so cool. And everyone should know who April Underwood is at Slack. She's amazing. And so what we did was we basically said, we don't have all the answers. Let's empower you to find solutions. And we found much, much better progress by actually giving people the tools and creativity to take the issue on head on versus sitting in the C-suite and sort of wondering from the ivory tower how we're going to solve this.
So is it your sense that things are going so well in the right direction, you're succeeding so well at Wikipedia, so many more people are getting called out that we don't have to really worry about this much? Or do you think there's actually more of a load that we have here that we actually do? I'm always worried, is gravity taking us the right place anyway, or do we have to tweak gravity to get to where we need to be to have just a more inclusive, more fair? I mean, I was taken by Karen Quinto's numbers when you're looking at 2 out of 10 end up in these pipelines or at certain positions. I was interested in the fact that compensation in this sector is so much higher. So apparently the compensation side of it is not enough of a draw, or there are barriers. So do you think because of the steps you're seeing that are positive? Because I love positive, feel-good stories, but I am a journalist and I also thrive in darkness and cynicism, and I want to know, what do you really?
We love that about you, Steve. He started this off being like, who are the villains? This has all been nice. Who are the villains?
Yeah. So in terms of moving to beyond the feel-good things that are going on, what are the other things? If you had a magic wand and you would change something, what would that be?
So I think you've asked the penultimate question, which is, are we winning or are we losing? And I think that's the question all of us struggle with. So if you are a woman or a man who cares deeply about the front lines of this issue, I think you ask yourself that question virtually every day. I think the key is balancing persistence and patience and celebrating some of the good work that's happening while actively asking everyone to do better. So to your question, do I think I have it all figured out? Do I think we at HubSpot, do I think we in tech have it all figured out? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. But do I think that if I were a young woman in the 4th grade deciding whether to consider tech, and all I heard about were the problems and the issues and how terrible it is and the harassment, that I would choose it as a career path? Heck no. And so I think we need to actually look 4th grade girls in the eye and say, not only do we believe in you, and the curriculum is important, don't get me wrong, and how we talk to the young girls is really important, but so too, they are smart. Part of the reason why they want to and aspire to be like Beyonce is because, frankly, her world looks really cool and fun and exciting and interesting. And so one of the things I think we need to do is, I am all about truth-telling. I am all about shining a light on the things that we need to do better in darkness. But I'm also very aware that in 4th grade, all you want to do as young women is belong and aspire to something that feels relevant and cool and creative and interesting and dynamic to you. And so if you feel like there's only bad things happening in the world of tech, no matter what we teach young women, it won't be what they choose to do as a profession. And so I think we need to balance that good news with the bad news, because young women want to do really amazing things, and I think we need to give them the autonomy to do it.
Thank you so much. Joan, I love your story. You wanted to be in science, you wanted to be in medicine, you were in high school, you knew kind of where you wanted to go, what your goals were, and you had a high school counselor that said, no, you shouldn't really go to Brown University. You ought to go over this way. I mean, you had a crappy counselor, so, and you've been working on it. I love the story just of what you've done, but I'd like to get yours, because there is a villain in your story that you kind of overcame, in my reading of it, if I were telling your story. How would you tell your story?
So this is an issue that is part of a story about it being a woman, but it's a large part about being an African-American woman. And that's part that I haven't heard in this discussion, this intersectionality, this race and ethnicity and ability and disability and socioeconomic status, and how those play together with being a woman in terms of lowering expectations and raising barriers. So what you're referring to is in high school, I decided I wanted to go to Brown. I reveal my age because I wanted to go to Pembroke, which then became Brown. And when I went to the guidance counselor, I was told, you'll never get in. Nobody from our school has ever gotten in. Nobody from our town can get in. You can't get in, do not apply. And the part that I haven't heard here is the role of family and how you are brought up in terms of possibility. Because for me, anything I wanted, I could do. Would have to work hard, would have to struggle maybe, but I could do it. And my response was, did you just tell me no? So I applied to one school. And I sit here as a physician. I clearly got in a school. And got accepted to Pembroke, but went to Brown and graduated from Brown. So part of this is about also not just what's offered in the school or programs, but what is offered in the family and the kind of role models and the settings and what people have. And I think this other issue of intersectionality, oftentimes when I am in conversations about women and advancing women, what is left out are these issues of women of color. And they are left out of the conversation. And so how do we, who are doing this work, expand our vision of how broad the problems are, so that when we create these images, we're creating diverse images. When we're creating these programs, we understand that the struggle is not just how I'm perceived as a woman, but how am I perceived as a Black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever it may be. How do we think more broadly about this? And then the other part is, how do we make sure that when we're talking to that student or we're going in, that they see some people that look like me? That it shouldn't be that it's always the white man or the white woman important. It's part of reality that's coming to talk with them. But they see people that they say, wait a minute, I could do that. I could be you. So this intersectionality is important.
So how do you do it? I know it's important. I was telling some of our friends at Dell last night about the Washington Ideas Forum, which the Atlantic just had in Washington with the Aspen Institute. And to be candid, we had great leaders that are dealing with racial questions, the founder of the National African American History Museum. If you look at our audience, it's not what it should be. It's not what it should be. So I called Maya Rocky Moore, who happens to be the wife of Elijah Cummings. She heads a think tank. She's very worried about many of these same questions, women, opportunity, networks. So I called her and I said, I spoke at your Future Wealth Conference and I met these amazing African American women, entrepreneurs throughout all companies. I said, look, it was Sunday, the conference starts Tuesday. Go to the site, type in my name, it's free. And so we had offered to 1,000 women, and it completely changed the nature of our conference. That's why I said today, meet people here that you might otherwise meet, because we created that network. I don't think I would have done that as honestly, if I hadn't known I was coming here to do this, and I was sort of interested in Joan and the fact that you're responsible for diversity, community partnerships, broadening. So I know it's important, but how actually do you do it to sort of reach community? What are the methodologies? I mean, I'd like to give people a nuts and bolts answer when you're sort of thinking about changing the game, moving the needle. Give us a framework, understanding of network, what you think are the keys to you succeeding or not succeeding.
So I'm going to start with the example you just used. If I look out at this room, and it's a beautiful room, and you've talked about this diversity of positions, there is not a lot of racial, ethnic diversity in this room. And in many of the rooms and spaces where we go, there is no diversity. So I'm going to start with a space of open our eyes and look out and say, who is not here?
Right.
And oftentimes we just accept it. So you can't say in one hand, I want and value diversity, and the other hand say, when I don't see it, it's okay. So the first part is questioning, who's here? Why are the people that are here here? How did they find out? How did they get invited? What is the process that's being used to bring people in? So bias doesn't happen by accident on these types of things. You have to be very deliberate and intentional and look at both the processes, the methods, who's coming, why are they coming and not coming, and question and reach out. Part of what has happened, and it's not just in your forums or these other spaces, we have a society where parts of our society are excluded. And what you're saying to people is, I want you to continue to just knock on the door asking if you can come in. And what I'm saying is you need to open that door and say, welcome in, which is what you did.
Yeah.
Which is what you did. So I think a part of this is acknowledging that. I think a part of this is creating spaces where people can not only come in, but have a role, are visible with the role. So they're speakers. They are planners. They are leaders. They are moving into spaces where they are helping set the tone for what happens. So it's not, I can be invited, but I can have a seat over here and not do anything and not really say anything. It's how can I be truly included and not just an image.
Terrific. And I know you deal with a kind of broad ecosystem, and Alec, I want to bring you into this because I know your job is, you got the weirdest job up here, I guess. You're deconstructing schools and building them from scratch.
Yeah.
Unions must hate you. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't impose my own kind of potential drama in your world. But I am interested when you kind of look at this broad question of, you've heard a lot here about creativity, reaching communities you wouldn't otherwise reach, and creating and changing the environment to actually, what are you learning when you're putting schools together in new experiences in terms of how that influences the track and choices that your young students eventually get on?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start by going back to your framing of who are the villains. I'm sure there are many, but at least two of them are men and schools, in my opinion.
Men in schools, okay.
And I'm starting a school, so some of my best friends work at schools. But in particular, I think one thing that school does, especially with STEM, is that we draw a black box around it as STEM, and then the question is, how do you bring people to STEM? We very rarely revisit the question of how do you change STEM so that it might get into other arenas that might not normally be seen as STEM. So the work that we've done historically before we were starting a school as an after-school program provider, we had the flexibility to think about how do you make more creative, expressive, interesting experiences that we had the luxury of not framing as STEM experiences, even if the schools that were hiring us thought, great, we can check the STEM or STEAM or whatever box. And I think that revisiting uses of technology or math, so that you're not just thinking about how do we dress up math, but what does math do? Forget about trying to get everyone some math. What are the uses that somebody might care about math for that aren't just about their long-term professional career, but might be about making a gift for somebody, might be about all the applications, some of which we've heard about already, but where you're not approaching it as I don't know what a good analogy is, like a cough medicine metaphor, where we know the medicine doesn't taste good, but we're going to dress it up to make it taste good. So I think that's one important thing that's really very coupled to how you train teachers, so the fact that school's often structured around subjects, it's very hard to change that. And I think another way in which school can be a villain is that unlike maybe in the workplace where you can control a lot of the boundary conditions, in Massachusetts, 93% of licensed teachers are white, for example. And when you think about the statistics for people who teach, especially in high school, math and science, you have kind of similar levels of disparity. And so if you need to revisit your staffing model in order to create that environment, like we can have a conversation about what the pipeline in graduate schools of education are and so on, but if just today you want to work with 30 to 40 kids to do something different, you have to address a lot of those organizational questions. Then on the men's side and the boys' side, I guess, I think something that's often underappreciated is rather than talking about how do we make this more attractive to women or girls, I think there should also be a conversation about how do we, it's a good way of saying it. Well, I think dick is a synonym for jerk for a reason. So, and I think that there are conversations to be had with boys.
That's a zinger here.
Well, so basically, I mean, especially when you're talking to kids whose like fathers are engineers, for example, they'll come in and they'll be like, this programming language is better than this one, and they'll tell people who are just getting started, like, don't do it like that, this is how I do it, and they're learning their own version of machismo, right? And I think that there are conversations to be had about how do you set up spaces where that's not the case. There are conversations to be had about how do you teach staff how to shut that down. There are conversations to be had with families about how do you have those conversations at home, right? That you don't want to end up engaging, not necessarily in a blaming the victim conversation with, say, girls in your school, but structurally a kind of a theory of change that functionally puts all the responsibility on the people who are kind of suffering the consequences.
Can I ask you a question? It's, one of the frustrating things about this subject, for me, to be honest, I mean, I love what you both of you just referenced, the family and the home. You know, sometimes some families are not supportive. Sometimes the neighborhood kids grow up in are horrible. I used to work when I lived in Los Angeles. The young boy who was in school, I was his mentor, tried to do this. He ended up getting shot and killed, named Delvine. And he was just in a terrible thing. He was a wonderful, wonderful child. He really, really wanted to move forward. He was excited about politics. He wasn't a science guy, but he was a science guy. And his life didn't end up going in the right direction. But I'm interested in the fact that sometimes, Alec, as you just described it, got to get in the family, I kind of agree with that in a way, but I know America's not really like that. And I want to go back to this. There was a lady over here asked us, do we need to be a little bit more forceful, compelled? Do we need a little bit more rigidity that just said, you know what, we're going to make it equal because we're going to impose a system in the schools that creates tracks for women at an earlier age? I kind of grew up in Japan. Japanese schools are not fun. But you got a lot of scientists. You go to Singapore, you go to China, you go to India. There are, in fact, more women in STEM over in all of those countries than there are in the United States. And so I'm just interested in, not to be too forceful in it, but what do we do for the crappy environments where you can't affect everything in terms of building resilience among young people to a certain degree so that they can take on things? Is that an unfair question?
No, not at all. I mean, I think part of the, so I don't know the answer, just to be clear. But I think part of the conversation that we worry a lot about is actually twofold. So one is that I think if you look at a lot of the rigid solutions, whether in school or elsewhere, one of the prices you pay for that rigidity is that for every scientist that's created, there are a lot of people who decide, actually, I never want to see science again, right? That's part of where we got the problem that we currently have to a lesser extent here. So even if that might succeed, and you might net increase the number of women, say, who are scientists, if you say, we're going to go back to the Sputnik era and we're going to make sure that everyone knows, like, this is what you do. I just don't think, just speaking as a practitioner who is friends with the kids they work with, that I'm not comfortable doing that to some people. So that's one piece of the answer, which isn't like a systemic lens on the situation. But I think the other piece is that I don't actually care that much about more people getting into STEM in the abstract, right? I care about STEM because it's powerful, because people can make more money doing it, because it's involved in many important conversations. It's not an abstract thing.
Right.
And I don't know how you would reconcile those two conversations of, I want to give you power, but actually you're not involved in this conversation, right? So again, I don't know the answer, but one of the things I really appreciate about school as an institution is that we don't have to operate at a 50,000-foot level.
Right.
The conversation about how do you have that conversation with a family is actually a conversation about how do I get to their house.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Joan?
So there's a piece in here, and I think oftentimes when we use the word family, we think of a traditional family.
Right. There aren't a lot of them anymore.
There aren't a lot, but there are lots of ways children have family.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can start to think about grandparents. You can start to think about adults who are meaningful role models and have a significant role in people's lives.
Right.
You can start to think about community as family. So when I think about ways to get to youth and ways to engage youth, sometimes it's through the church. Sometimes it's through the Boys and Girls Clubs. Sometimes it's taking it where the youth are and the organizations that they trust. So it's not how do we sit in our beautiful buildings and say, oh, come in. It's about how do we also reach out? How do we partner with others in our community and other organizations who care equally about these children, but maybe not have the resources we have or have the understanding. So how do we partner, collaborate?
Katie, real quickly before I go to the audience, does that resonate for you? Do you when you have the science, and I know you're trying to promulgate and export these practices out, which are, I don't know how that's going, but when you've heard from our colleagues here, do you have that same sense, or do you wait for them to get inside the ivory tower before you begin working on them?
Oh no, a land-grant university like the University of Massachusetts is never in an ivory tower. It's pretty deeply engaged in how curricula are organized, how mentoring's organized. They're deeply into the K through 12 schools. I was interested, Joan, when we were talking before we came up here, in her work as in pediatrics. The doctor's office is another place where the potential for helping to educate families about what they can do for their children is rich. I think what we need to do is understand that all of the experiences that have been outlined here do have a scientific underpinning to them. There's a reason why mentoring makes a difference. There's a reason why a Wikipedia image makes a difference. And if we understand more about how that's working, and by the way, the original research on this had nothing to do with women. It had everything to do with minorities. Claude Steele's work on stereotype threat, its whole beginnings were around why we were missing so many minority kids and what happens when you go in to take a standardized test, which is another one of those barriers. If you believe that a standardized test is a measure of your intelligence, you will perform in one way, and if you're told it's a measure of your interest, it turns out the performance characteristics are completely different. So again, these are manipulable ideas about what leads to success and failure, and if we dwell on them and learn how to work with them, we will see people elect these career pathways, which are highly rewarding, and open up more opportunities to them. So I don't think this is an ivory tower enterprise, but it is an enterprise that begins with a recognition that there are regular ways in which we can test these ideas, and then they can be applied and effectively applied, and they will move the needle on whether or not women and minorities stay in these fields and persist in them against frustrations that everyone in them experiences. If we talk about the successes, behind every success, there's always somebody who's had a setback. I'm sure you've had them as well. But if you interpret a setback as something that you can get over, that's very different than a signal to get out of the field.
Right. Katie?
Yes, echoing what's already been said, I think the other thing in addition to leaving our buildings is really challenging the notion of sameness as success. And so I think what we look for in traditional interview processes, what you're really looking for is that this confirmation that this person is like you in some way or like the people on your team. You're looking for social, intellectual, academic signals that this person is in some way, shape, or form similar to folks who are already operating successfully in your environment. Turns out that's a terrible way to hire people and to evaluate their long-term success. And so I think for companies, it's about looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, why are we thinking about culture fit versus culture add? Why aren't we looking people and saying, what are you going to challenge? The question that I ask most often in our interview process is, we have a really strong culture. What are you going to add to it? What don't you like? About what you've seen and heard about our culture, what would you challenge? What do you think is a problem for us? And I want people to have active answers to that. Part of the challenge with traditional interviewing processes is you're basically saying, Steve, how much are we alike? If we're alike, pass go. And obviously, to Joan's point, that has huge implications for communities of color. It has huge implications for folks with physical challenges and abilities. It has huge implications for our LGBTQ friends, and I think we can do better as companies.
Thank you very much. All of you have been fantastic. Let me open up the floor for comments, questions. Yes, right here. Hi.
Hi. So
tell us who you are.
I am Usha Singh, working at National Grid with Andy.
Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Part of the strategic, I'm in the IT field, but I'm a geologist by profession, I guess. I'm from South Africa. The first geologist qualified in South Africa and the first female geologist to hold a cum laude. and then, of course, the first that was invited for a full ride to Oxford. I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. My question is, so my kids have had a very seamless ride into the STEM field. I was involved in Illinois in building a new high school and the whole STEM progression, but also including some of the arts in that. So my question is there a profile that we can hone in the early years, that we can develop different nurturing streams to propagate these individuals into community leaders and the
Interesting
professional
question.
track?
Profiles, nurturing plateaus. I mean, a different language sounds similar to somewhat of you've been talking about intervening at certain points to do this. Is there such a I don't know, plug and play system for kids, or would that be a big mistake? Catherine?
So one observation, if you have a project group that has 1 woman and 3 men, the likelihood that the woman will emerge as a leader or a minority will emerge as a leader is much lower than if it's 2 women and 2 men. The patterns of communication, the patterns of confidence, the ability to surface your talent is inflected by the composition of those groups. That's true in the classroom, that's true in research groups, and I would be willing to bet that's true among children as well.
There's a part of me when I hear of moving people down certain pipelines, there's a part of me that sort of sits up and says, what? Because I actually think of a way a good friend of mine, Woody Myers, put it, our children as pluripotential stem cells that can go in any direction. And part of the problem is they don't know the directions that are available to them. And so how do you start to give them this permission to explore, this permission to say, I can create a space for my interests? So an example is there's a program, Biomedical Science Careers Program I started over 25 years ago that's about identifying high school through graduate and postdocs and helping them to understand how to gather information, the kinds of options that are available to them, broadening their sense of STEM. So for me, and matching them with mentors and advisors, so for me, the high school student who says, I love science, but I love writing, and to be able to say, you could be a science writer. Okay. That's not a pipeline I think of naturally. It's how do you open the door so that they can help think of that. And that's part of our challenge in how we do it. So for me, success is not every student in my program has to go to medical school. Every student has to find their own place and what excites them.
Pluripotential stem cells?
Pluripotential stem cells.
I love that. That's tweetable, folks. I mean, we could start a new hashtag out there. It's a lot of characters, but yes, one question right here. Yes. Right.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Melissa Donovan. I'm from Southern New Hampshire University. My question is about scalability and also accessibility. And one of the things that I face as Associate Dean is that I can't always get the information to the masses like I would like. So my question is, for the panel, how do you see this sort of virtual asynchronous type learning being implemented so that we can start to close some of these gaps? Do you think that's
We're right near the end, so we'll be lightning round. Alec, scalability, accessibility.
Sure.
I would also put affordability. I mean, when you think about we want stuff to go viral, you've got a lot of money that just dropped on you from Laureen Powell Jobs to go invent this thing. So I wonder if you come up with a great idea, will the system be able to absorb it, replicate it, change it, make it work for a lot of other folks?
I mean, ask me again in 10 years. But when it comes to scalability of these types of interventions, I think something worth keeping in mind is what I was mentioning earlier about STEM. You can talk about them as a set of subjects, but I think then you end up in the conversation about pathways. And the reality is that we've had textbooks for a long time. We did TV shows. There are lots of scalable media. And the types of issues that people run into, whether stereotype, threat, or otherwise, that move them off these paths are not about bad textbooks. That's part of it. They're not about bad MOOCs. They're not about Khan Academy. Like those things can help and enable different models. But to me, the question of scalability isn't how do you make this happen all under one organization, but how do you make some of the types of human interactions and relationships that are going to keep people's relationship to these disciplines healthy? How do you scale those, even if it's not all under the umbrella of one organization? Like you can have many independent coffee shops without having one big coffee company. And I think one of the roles that blended learning and kind of similar technologies to the kind of space that we're talking about offer is that somebody who doesn't necessarily have domain expertise can act as a mentor or a coach. They can be a meaningful person in somebody's life, even if they don't have that background. But I think that's a much subtler design problem than most people kind of give it credit for.
Katie, I'm going to give you a last word in responding to this, but I also want you just 30 seconds on, you've built so many networks, you've changed things with Wikipedia, you've thought, in this HubSpot way about networks. If I gave you 5 years not to do any of the other duties you have right now, what networks would you go build, particularly in the private sector?
So we have talked about going to physical places where children are, and I would echo Joan's comments around churches and athletic stadiums. The reality is where most people go for answers is the internet. And so I actually think we get events like this make us excited and energized. As human beings, there's something we all love about a cocktail party. But the reality is that someone who identifies as a first-generation American, if they're looking for information on how to become a science writer, they're going to go to Google. And so the construct that we've built at HubSpot is, physical events are great. Everything needs to be accompanied by equally helpful content that anyone, anywhere, at any time can find and access and create value from. And so the construct that our founders have outlined is the notion of being shockingly helpful. One of the sentiments I always feel in these events is everyone wants to be heard. Everyone has a story to share, a problem that they're trying to solve, or information, frankly, that they have that's unique or programs they care about. Often they wait to come to events like this to share those. My ask of each of you is, I would love to spend 5 years just focused on this, and I have a lot of big plans and ideas, but so too do all of you. And if they live only in your head, women, the thing that I always say to women about creating content is most of their most important content and voices are in their drafts folder. And they stay in their drafts folder because we don't have the confidence to put our voice out there and say, I'm going to stand for something, and you might disagree with it, and it might not be perfect, but I'm going to do something cool, and I'm going to stand for something. And so I think the most important networks we're going to create are not in physical places. They're on social media, and they're in virtual networks. And I think the most important thing everyone in this room can do is share their story. I would not have met the first female geologist from South Africa. Now I have. But I would love for that to be a blog post that anyone can find. So as they're thinking about how they could combine science and content creation, they would know your story as well. So I would encourage everyone to share those stories, because the young women we're talking about trying to inspire, they live online. So give them compelling stories and content that they can gravitate towards and learn from.
Thank you so much. Catherine Newman, University of Massachusetts, Joan Reed of Harvard Medical School, Alec Resnick, Tearing Apart Schools, Powderhouse Studios, and Katie Burke, HubSpot. Thank you all very, very much. Very fun conversation. Not Ivy League, or Ivy League.
And thank you, Steve, again for moderating. And I would also like to thank Dell for their tremendous support, and all of you here in our audience for taking the time to be with us here today. And please, a favor, keep an eye out for an email from me with a survey about this program. There are hard copies available in this room on your chairs, and your feedback is important to us. So please take a moment to fill those out. And thanks again. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again to the panelists. Thank you.
But I would just like to make sure you were here together. So, okay, so anytime, no rush. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty much everything.